Hi guys, welcome to the Wilderness Channel. I'm going to take you today through the mangroves of the Qurm Beach or Shatel Qurm Beach area in Muscat, Oman. Oman is on the Arabian Peninsula and it's quite an interesting little mangrove swamp, and we'll point out a few things as I go along through the swamp, and then we'll go from there. So there we have some house crows and an Indian roller. This is in the mangrove area. What we're looking at now though are Prosopis juliflora trees, which are an introduced species, which is introduced for its wood, and there's an Indian miner flying past as well. Introduced for its wood and as browsing for livestock, but highly invasive, especially in the wadis or watercourse areas. So I'm going to just pan in again. Okay, here we go. So you can see they've pretty much taken over this part of the area, but I'm going to walk around and take you through the mangrove swamps and show you things as we go along. There are a lot of tracks around here. You can see down there some ghost crab tracks. You'll also find tracks of various birds such as sand partridge, feral pigeon, and of course Indian miners, which are ubiquitous in this area. Here we have a black mangrove tree. It's quite high up. The tide doesn't really get up to this area, so it's quite high up, especially for a mangrove tree. As we walk around, this is called the Qurm Mangrove area in Muscat, Oman. Okay, this is more juliflora, Prosopis juliflora. There's an indigenous Prosopis species called Prosopis cineraria, but it is not growing around here, unfortunately. It's a more upright tree. But I did find something in the bushes here, so I'm going to just show you something rather unusual, and I suspect it's been brought here by a fisherman as a bycatch. It's burrfish, basically, sometimes also called porcupine fish, Diodon hystrix, and these dried out or desiccated skeletons have been left here, and I'm not really sure what the purpose was. If they're a bycatch, they would have been discarded, in which case I can understand that, but this is quite high up on the beach, so it's unlikely they could have washed here unless there was a particularly high tide. Even then, I don't think the tide, even with the spring tides, I don't think the tides reach this high. But anyway, that's some burrfish. Let me just try and get a better view. Yeah, it's kind of difficult to get in underneath these branches here. They're very spiny, so it's hard to handle them. And they kind of really grown over these fish here. And I only have one hand because I'm holding the camera with the other, so it's kind of hard to give you a good view, but there we go. You can at least see kind of what the fish looks like. So the fish have these porcupine fish or burrfish have these spines for self-defense. When they are threatened, they inflate themselves. Obviously, yeah, they've all inflated themselves when they felt threatened for whatever reason it was, and it could even just be stranding, and this is the result. Some burrfish. So nice find here. Here we have some more ghost crab tracks. We also have feral dog tracks. They're moving towards the left of the screen. Okay, there are actually at least two dogs here that I can see, and they tend to come out at night. They're nocturnal because it's very hot in this area, and they tend to avoid the midday heat and the daily temperatures, so you usually see them at night. They're also persecuted sometimes by human beings, which is another reason why they would avoid coming out here. And these tracks, I believe, could possibly be, I'm guessing now, but based on what I'm thinking, it's probably a good chance that it's sand partridge. But you also do get a what we call thickney, which is a bird with a large head and rather large eyes. It's nocturnal, but it has more bird-shaped toes, so I'm going to probably go, I'm in two minds, but sand partridge or thickney. one of the two. So we're at the main channel of the mangroves. You can see that bird in the distance there, and you're calling as well. It's one of the lapwings. It's the red-wattled lapwing. Here it comes. Okay, very characteristic call. All lapwings make a lot of noise to try and distract you from their nesting area, and if you get really close and they feel like their eggs are threatened or their nestlings are threatened, they may even feign injury. So they kind of pretend that their wing is broken, and they'll do a broken wing display. But we're not going to probably find anything right now in terms of chicks or eggs. But they like to be in open areas, typically, so open fields or open sandbanks, where they've got a good view of predators. So this is the main channel coming into the mangrove. This channel actually winds around in kind of a U shape and comes out on the other end of the estuary, once again joining the sea. So it's kind of like an oxbow lake or a horseshoe shape. But yeah, you can see it's a very pretty mangrove, and it's stuck right in the center here of the Qurm area of Muscat. You can see some of the minarets of the mosques in the area. Yeah, and these are all black mangroves. Most other mangrove swamps have a lot of different species, 3, 4, 5 different species. For example, in South Africa, I think there are at least 4, if not 5. I think there's one new one that was found. Whereas here, it's just one species, the black mangrove, Avicennia marina. Yellow flowers, heady scent, which attracts a lot of bees and other pollinating insects, and it apparently makes very good honey. You can see some movement on the water there. A lot of estuarine fish will occur here. I have seen guitar fish, dead guitar fish here. I've seen a lot of other fish like flathead fish, and you can get many different species here. Anyway, so this is a typical estuary. An estuary is an area where a river meets the sea, or typically where you have an outlet going into the sea, and some people might call it a lagoon, but the technical term really is an estuary. And so the water will be brackish, mixed between brackish and fresh water, sometimes very salty if the tide comes in, and the waters don't generally mix very easily, because the waters, seawater and salt water, are quite different in density. Seawater is denser, so you typically find it'll form kind of a distinct line in the water underneath, to separate the two. But you can see a lot of activity, the fish hopping about, which is really cool. Okay, so we just at another part of the channel. You can see the young mangrove trees there on the opposite bank. You can see the pneumatophores, or mud roots that come out, air roots that come out of the muddy substrate. Those help the plant to breathe and also to extract salts. The leaves also extract salts, and the leaves will extract salts in 2 ways. One, by just absorbing a lot of salts and eventually being sacrificed or amputated from the tree to remove the salts. And the other way is by guttation. In other words, it oozes out this very salty water which removes salts. The roots, apparently though, the pneumatophores can remove up to 90% of the salt from the water. So that's how these mangroves survive as specialists in this brackish environment. There was a bird that was squeaking or chirping, not chirping, I guess squeaking, and I just saw it out of the corner of my eye flying by. It was a curlew. A curlew has an extremely long bill, which is downwardly curved, and it probes the mud for a lot of invertebrates. So kind of hard to show you that on a cell phone camera, but anyway. So I'm at the bank here. I'm just going to look at some of the shells that are over here, and yeah, if you look here, you see there's these tiny little shells, and they're very, very pretty actually. I believe the scientific name is Umbrinia vesicarum, and there are lots of different varieties. You can see if you look carefully, you can see, for example, over there's a couple of them, very, very different patterns, but they're all the same species, and they typically occur in these swamps, in these mangrove swamps, and well, they're washed up here, let's put it that way. And you find them washed up on the beaches here. This one here looks a bit like what I understand to be Tarantella, but there's one that's similar to it, so I stand to be corrected, but they kind of elongate shells like that with these sort of clear divisions as it spirals down. Really nice. Okay, another ghost crab hole. You can see the sand that's been dug out has been put in one pile. Very typical. Ghost crabs use these holes for shelter and then come out as the tide changes to feed, and you'll often find them fighting. Often if you see flies around the hole, it'll tell you that the crab's in the hole, so it is an occupied hole, and I believe this is quite an active occupied hole. There's a smaller hole just above it that's on the right hand side. That's also a ghost crab, but a smaller specimen. And yeah, Ocypode is the genus. If you go just a bit to the right here, if you look here, this is a fruit from a black mangrove tree. The fruits are actually able to start germinating on the tree. So the seeds rather are able to start germinating on the tree, and they'll typically produce a root or hypocotyl, and they'll drop off and then start to grow fairly quickly on the sand. But this is kind of an immature fruit that didn't really get to develop before it fell off the tree. It might have been blown off in a storm. Here's a wonderful species of jellyfish that has washed ashore. I've noticed in the last couple of days a lot of jellyfish have begun to wash ashore. So obviously it's late summer, and it's a typical time when you see a lot of jellyfish in any part of the world start to kind of wash up on the shore. It's now mid-August, or just past mid-August, and so this jellyfish is called Medusa, and this is a typical form. There we go. And they can have stinging cells called nematocysts, depending on the species. Some are harmless to human beings and others are quite dangerous. For example, a related animal is the blue bottle, or Portuguese man of war, which is highly venomous and very dangerous. Ericongia, which is a tiny jellyfish, has long tentacles with stinging cells that cause excruciating pain for a 24-hour period. And they feed, basically, they entrap their prey, which can be large fish even, with their stinging tentacles, and then they eat them through a mouth or manubrium, which is sort of in the middle of where the tentacles are. And yeah, they basically envelop the prey, the paralyzed prey, and then consume them. But yeah, this is a typical jellyfish Medusa. Unfortunately, this is very far away. I can't get any closer. These birds are very nervous, but we have basically a curlew on the right hand side closest to us, and then we have two herons. They look like they are both western reef herons. You get a white form and a bluish grey form, but it's hard to tell from this distance, but it looks like two western reef herons. And then of course the curlew. Look at that long bill. I don't know whether you can notice it on the video so far away, but yeah, quite amazing really. Very, very, very long, decurved or curved down bill. It's busy cleaning itself now. Whimbrels are very similar, except they have a slightly shorter bill, and they will have a sort of crown marking on their head. So we're under the bridge now that crosses one of the outlets to the estuary, and looking at some of the rocks here. I'm going to pan across. You can see there's actually a crab on the rocks there. It's one of the Cyclograpsis species, I believe, one of the rock crab species, and they tend to feed on algae that grows on the rocks as the rocks become moist, and it's jumped across to another rock. They often jump into the water if they feel extremely threatened. And if you look at these rocks, just focusing on this one here, you can see there's some remains of oysters, and then there are also some other remains. I just saw a crab over there. So these are the oysters here, okay, and then all these other sort of volcano-like shells are actually related to crabs, believe it or not. They're crustaceans, and they are not related to mussels, and they basically are an example of a sessile or attached crab species, crab-like species, which grows on rocks and also on whales and and also on floating objects in the sea. So these barnacles will extend their legs out from the top here, and they will catch small particles in the tide and feed like that. So here we go. So there are usually different numbers of plates on these barnacles, which is used to help identify the species. Also on rocks sort of in this kind of zone here in Oman, you'll typically find in the lower areas, especially where the tide does cover the rocks extensively, you'll find chitons, which are shells with very it's an oval shape with a girdle around the outside of the shell, outside edge of the shell, and then a series of plates called valves on the top that are arranged in sort of parallel in rows, or in a row. So it's a very unusual creature, chiton. I'll try to put a picture up with this video for that. Yeah, so an interesting area. Kinds of birds you're going to find here. You're going to find definitely herons trying to catch the crabs, and you will also find greenbacked herons or striated herons, Euterides striatus. Okay, they're interesting birds because they do actually fish. They'll catch fish, also the crabs, but they'll catch fish on the edge of flowing water, and they'll use a lure to catch the fish. So they'll throw in a little twig or something, or a leaf, and the fish are attracted to that, and they'll snap up the fish. So very interesting. But this is the typical area you're going to find striated herons or greenbacked herons.